Roger that, Victor. See you on the other side.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's indeed a delight to be here. And I just want to make this a little bit interactive. We'll have some Q&A. There is as you can see, a QR code which you can log into now. You'll see 4 questions, and we can talk about those 4 questions. But if you wait for me to ask you the question before you answer it, that will work. I'm just thinking about people who are coming up later. How will they get the QR code? Anyway, we'll figure that one out later. Right. Is that not working? Oh, that's okay. No worries. We might come back to it. Slide thing mover. Need that. Okay, so I don't want to bore you with finance and budgeting and things like that, but I really want to talk about an opportunity that we have and the role of finance. And I know not all of you are finance GBSs. GBSs means multifunctional, obviously, but I want us to wear a business hat, and I want us to think about what role could GBSs play, what role from finance, how can we learn about how does this translate to the GBS? I know finance would be a core part of your GBS services, but what role could we be playing? And if I just go back for the people who've just come. For those who walked in, if you want to scan the QR code, because I just realized we don't have it after the opening slide. I just want your participation as we go along. And so the relevance of this discussion, although it's centered around finance, is really the big question of value that we heard from the previous panel. Is the GBS service model, does it create value? Does it add value? How do you measure value? All of these things are really relevant in this discussion. So when we think about the finance role, and we think about, and you can apply this to supply chain, you can apply this to HR. On the left, we are trying to figure out what happened, and that's about recording, reporting what has actually happened in the past. And then we try and figure out why did it happen, and every function does this. Why did something happen in operations? Why did something happen in HR? Why did something happen in the business? And that's where management accounting kind of comes into play. And then we try to figure out how do we make things happen going into the future, and that requires knowing how to make it happen and then actually doing it. So when we think about finance, when we think about business, when we think about business management, this is kind of the progression towards creating value, making the decision, and executing. Now, pictures paint 1,000 words, and 1,000 worlds too. What I'm trying to show here is we've learned a lot from what's happening in 2 areas, and I'm going to draw some analogies. And we've learned a lot from manufacturing, and we've learned a lot from cockpits and planes. In my spare time, I fly a small plane, and I really can relate to what's happening in the cockpit to what's happening in the business. So this is the Lexus plant in Kentucky as it looked 25 years ago, and that's how it currently runs. And if you think about the transactional aspects of GBSs, of what we do, if you look at record to report or hire to retire, order to cash, etc., they're all an assembly line. People come, they make changes, the transaction moves on, somebody else comes, does something else to it, and by the time it finishes, it ends up in a report, or it ends up as a payment, or as a receipt, etc. It ends up in a ledger somewhere. And that's what we've been doing. we've transitioned to people, those red circles, who are managing the processes rather than operating the machines themselves. There's another story, and that's of automation in a cockpit. And the wooden seat you see there is that of a navigator. And the navigator would sit behind the pilot and co-pilot, would have a large cluster of instruments, would do a significant amount of risk management, would chart the course for the plane to hit the waypoints, and make sure the plane gets safely from point A to point B to its destination with adequate fuel, without hitting terrain. You don't want to fly into a mountain. You don't want to fly into weather, looking at weather patterns, charting a course to safely take the plane to its destination. And that's what finance, sitting in the back seat, used to do as a navigator. Essential part of the crew. The plane would not take off without the navigator. And the pilot, co-pilot depend on the navigator to provide information. The cluster of instruments that the navigator is looking at is monitoring several systems in the business to take the business safely to its target so that it delivers its budget, its forecast, with adequate cash flow, and making sure we're not running into or running over our customers or suppliers, etc. So, essential part of the crew in the 50s and 60s. We learned a lot from cockpit automation, and we have the Dreamliner's cockpit, no need for a navigator. It's all glass panels, information at the fingertips. You no longer need a provider of the information. It's all available. It's autopilot. So cockpit automation is similar to what is happening now with AI and Gen AI, etc. The machine is flying the plane. Now, take a guess of what amount of automation is involved from point A to point B, origin gate to gate. How much do you think is, if you look at the whole flight, how much of it is automated? 50%? 60%? 70%? Any guesses? Right? It's actually 97% in the US and 98% in Europe. There's a slight difference in what should be automated and what not. But most of the flight is automated. The manual part of the operations are pushing back from the gate, taxiing to the finals, taxiing to the takeoff point, taking off, and then at the other end, it's the landing and taxiing to the gate. So most of the flight is actually automated. So you think, what are the pilots doing in the cockpit, right? So it allows them to do things that they could not do before. And I think that's the story of how we look at, when we're looking at our automation, when we're looking at the value that finance function adds, or the value that any function adds, or the value that your GBS is adding, how do we start to look at how to beat this fear of automation? The one thing that had to happen was the navigators needed to learn to fly the plane. No longer was the navigator just saying to the co-pilot or the captain, you need to turn 2 degrees to the left because the winds have changed. The navigator had to execute that decision after machines were telling him winds have changed, or he was monitoring or she was monitoring the autopilot to make sure the aircraft is still heading in the right direction. So that analogy really easily and readily applies to our businesses. And so if we start to think about technology, technology does drive transformation. We've seen 2 types of transformation: manufacturing, transformation in the cockpit. And if you think about the processes that we are executing, the knowing what happened, when it happened, is really kind of table stakes, low value. But as you go to the right and you start to engage in decision support and decision making and execution, that's where you're really having the highest impact, and that's where you are creating value. And so if you think about how do you transition the activities of your GBS, you can translate, as I said, this finance or to HR or to any function you take. The closer you get to decision and execution, the more value you add. And so we see that tech, automation, AI, machine learning, etc., is helping us in the left-hand side. It's helping us to look at transactional recording and some analysis. But as you move towards the right, we now have generative AI, which is now generating commentary, generating new content, and giving us insights. But at the end, you actually need humans in order to be executing, in order to be partnering. You cannot partner with technology. And in order to create that impact and create the highest value, you cannot do it without humans. And so that's what we're seeing in finance. What we're seeing is the kind of value add that finance has to do and the opportunity for finance to be continuing to move towards the right and add more value, that opportunity continues to increase. And so technology and automation is becoming an enabler for human skills to come in order to add value. Now, here's where we come up with a challenge is as you automate, you might have heard the saying, as you automate, you need to elevate. And what you are elevating is you're trying to elevate your skills of those who used to operate on the left, but as they move to the right, you need to elevate. You need to invest in talent. You need to invest in upskilling or new skilling, either new skills or higher order skills that enable them to partner, that enable them to engage in decision-making, decision support. So we cannot forget that whether you might look at a transformation with technology, but it's the people that ultimately make it happen. And through the day, I've heard quite a bit about talent and quite a bit about investing in people, etc. So it is a really critical thing for us as leaders to think about transformation and not to think about transformation just as technology. It's technology and talent which will transform. So the two T's equal the bigger T. And so I want to talk about a guidance gap and the biggest opportunity for us to add value. And this gap, about 67%, was pre-COVID, when Gartner did an analysis within the S&P 500. They asked their businesses if finance was providing enough guidance in terms of business decision making. And the gap was 67%. And this is not about GBSs, this is not about shared service center, this is finance function as a function that says we help in decision making, we help in partnering, etc. The gap was 67% identified by the businesses. So what I wanted to do was, I wanted to ask you guys, if you think about your functions and you think about decision support, what do you think your organizations, in terms of what they expect from you in terms of guidance and what you are delivering, what is the gap? And I'm hoping you guys are on your phones and answering the question. So how do you think about that? Just as a feel, very, very quickly, do you think the gap is only about 20%? Or you think on the other side, the gap is about 80%? We'll try and get back to the... Well, that sound is a good sound. One person has responded. Can't be. Take your best guess. Just let's see what we have in the room. So this is the guidance gap in terms of, are we providing enough guidance as the co-pilot? Yeah, about 25 to 50% is the safe thing to estimate, right? So, yeah, you can see, I think that would average to about 67%, if 60, maybe 55%, depending on how many people have voted. 10, 12 people have voted. So I'll move on to the slide, but you get the idea. The thing is, us finance leaders continue to automate, we continue to augment, but we are not really addressing the skills gap. So the opportunity is really around for you and your functions to think about business guidance and how you can add value and really engage in that value creation zone when you're operating to the right. Now, what is it that is redefining finance and finance function? And again, I think you'll come to some significant opportunities here. The intent of my talk today to you guys is for you to think about what are the opportunities that you might want to pick up from here as you go back, and what are the things that finance are really struggling with. So business decision-making guidance becomes even more complicated as we go into the future. Technology and sustainability are the two big drivers that are changing the way we do business. And there are several others. Yeah, there's this rollback of globalization, there's an aging population, demographics are challenging, and customer has more power in terms of customer information, etc. Yes, all of that is changing, but the two big things that really are reshaping businesses is sustainability and technology. And how that impacts finance is in this world where technology is forcing business models to change, relationships to be managed beyond our enterprise, and capitals that need to be managed, and I'll talk about capitals in a second, and a much longer time horizon through which you have to operate and create value. We heard before, you're talking to universities, you're thinking about talent, you're thinking about that talent eventually coming into your center, and then you're thinking about utilizing talent as you go forward. It's a very long-term game, and what you're investing in something today, you really have to have a 10-year, 15-year type window in order to be assessing that value of the investment. And yet businesses are faced with numbers. We heard about how do you measure value. They talked about P&L, talked about margin, talked about cost. And if you really think about value, value is generated when you look at your value of your enterprise, that is generated over a much longer time period, and yet finance are focused on this quarter's results, this year's budget, and perhaps the next year's forecast. So the time horizons are shifting rapidly, and that's an opportunity, but that's also a challenge for finance to have a much longer view of the future for the investments you're making. Sustainability is causing that because any investment you make in an energy efficient building or changing your fleet from fossil fuels to electrified vehicles. Those are large investments, and they have a payback and returns which will take much longer. And so what we have is the very value, how you define value is changing. Value used to be about shareholder profits. Value used to be about margins. But in an ESG sustainable world, you realize how value is becoming more and more intangible. And that's not new. We've seen value becoming intangible in the past. And this intangibility of value has continued to grow significantly. So if you look at how we used to focus on shareholder returns, and it was all around capital that we could count and report based on financial reporting standards. But if you look at the value, only 10% of the value now is in the balance sheet. The other 90% of value of an enterprise, which the market is valuing, is actually not in your balance sheet. And so that's in your human capital, in your natural capital, intellectual capital, and social and relationship capital. And so when we think about the value of a GBS, or you think about the value your GBS and your services are adding, it's not just about profit, and it's not just about margin. We need to start telling this intangible story. And you think about how does GBS, how does what you do go way beyond the financials? Think about the intellectual capital that you've built in your centers. It's massive. Think about the human capital and the talent and how you're developing that talent and retaining that talent and nurturing that talent. If you start to And these things cannot be measured in dollars and pounds and zlotys, and that's the problem. But you need to start to be able to build a story of that value creation through other proxy metrics, through other narratives. And that's what's happening in the finance world. We're going very much from not just a P&L and balance sheet, we're moving towards what they're calling an integrated report. And an integrated report tells the story of how an enterprise is creating value. It doesn't create value in the P&L and balance sheet, in its capitals on its own, but it's utilizing human capital, intellectual capital, social and relationship capital in order to create that value. And now the other thing that's happening is, alongside financial reporting standards, we're going to have sustainability reporting standards. Have you heard of ESRSs, European Sustainability Reporting Standards? So that is in place from 1st of January of 2024. So we are in October now, and several finance people do not realize there are legal requirements for reporting this year when we come to reporting next year. And Europe has issued 12 standards. And one of the standards is around climate change. And one of the reporting requirements in one of those 12 is carbon. And I know a lot of companies have been reporting carbon footprint, but the standard requires you to measure in a very specific way, to recognize in a very specific way, and to disclose in a very specific way. So because now you have a standard, you have a responsibility to report accurately, and in the future you will be audited on that requirement as well. So what I'm presenting to you is this big additional reporting opportunity that we need to start thinking about. How is our company doing that now? And how are we going to start to report on human capital, on the natural capital, intellectual and social and relationship capital? Europeans have made this extremely complex, and I'm just trying to give you without giving the very details, I'm just trying to give you a message that it's a big gap that businesses haven't recognized yet, that they will have to start reporting on these sustainability standards. In your social relationship capital, you have to start reporting the impact of your entity on your communities. That's what the standard requires. What impact are you having on your communities, positive or negative? So employment, yes, or are you polluting the waterways? How are you impacting your communities? Are you creating more traffic? There's a significant amount of detail that the standard goes into. Carbon footprint is one of them, is one of the standards under climate. There are 4 standards under, so there's biodiversity, waste management, natural resource management, etc. under E. Under S, you have how communities are impacted. You have slavery in the workforce type reporting. So your supply chain of workforce reporting. It's a lot of additional reporting. And don't think that maybe you are of a size where this doesn't apply to you, or you're not listed in Europe, etc. 50,000 organizations, it's estimated, will be impacted by this reporting in 2014. 50,000. So just check if you're one of them and think about how you're going to start reporting this. So that was the shift in longer term and the shift in not just tangible assets, but the intangible assets. The other shift we have to make is in stakeholder management and in our business model management. Now, where we predominantly live in finance and where a lot of GBSs would be focusing on is measurement. So we live in value measurement zone, which is at the bottom. The value measurement zone is an outcome of all the other activities in the enterprise. So if we are just living in the measurement zone, we are measuring value, or we might be protecting value, but we are not really creating value. Value is created right at the very top, customer value proposition. In the previous talk, if you were here, they were talking about how you need to be looking at product, how the product is developed and delivered to the marketplace. You need to be thinking about how your customers are serviced. It's not just about payments, receivables, etc., but it's about how are you impacting the customer experience. So we have to move out of this measurement and we have to start engaging with customer value propositions. We have to start engaging in relationships. And finance does engage in relationships with investors or relationships with banks, the taxman, etc. But these relationships are going beyond the enterprise in terms of managing your relationship with your communities in which you operate, for example, that I just said before, managing your employees. If you think about the intangible asset of human capital, and it was mentioned several times through the day, the human capital, people are the most valuable capital. How are we managing that? How are we reporting on that? How are we investing in that? So making sure your resources and relationships are managed, those intangibles that we talked about are being managed, measured, and reported, and then you're actually creating a culture and a scale which is disruptive, which is innovative, and you're engaged in strategic development. So it's not about service delivery, but we heard it's about strategic service delivery. So these are the ways, and these are the shifts that not only finance has to make. I can translate that into HR having to make that, etc. So having talked about these 4 shifts, I just want to see the temperature in the room in terms of, are you relating with these 4 shifts? Do you see that these 4 shifts are relevant? And I don't know if you all finance people or not. How many of you are finance, by the way, or accounting? Okay, some of us are. Rakesh thinks he is. But I don't think you have the QR code, do you, Rakesh? That's really interesting. I normally don't see, and I don't know how many people have voted, so such a significant number of no's. So if you're brave enough, and you can share, why do you think it's relevant, not relevant, or there are other changes that you see? Anyone who answered no want to go? You didn't think I would ask that. No? Okay. So I'm glad you're connecting with it, but maybe we can talk later in terms of why you said no, since you're not wanting to challenge me openly. And the other question I had was, are you ready to make these shifts? So just in terms of having heard about these shifts and having heard about the opportunity we have to add value, do you think you're ready for making these shifts? If you said yes, how do we move to the right-hand side, to the value creating zone? Wow, that's really pretty impressive. So I spoke too soon. Oh, it's not just the realization, but it's the ability to actually change and shift out of that zone into the value creation zone. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So a fair amount of you are ready to make that change. And then I guess those of you who've said yes, I wanted to check how you will make that change eventually. Okay, so I said sustainability is not just about reporting. It's going to fundamentally change how you define value, how you will create that value, how you will deliver that value, and how you'll capture that value. So that's your business model in the middle. And it is about integrating sustainability into your business. Now, a lot of people think sustainability is something you do on the side. There is a team that does sustainability. There's a team that will measure it. There's a team that will deliver the reports. Now, if you think about sustainability as a business issue, we will be reacting differently. If you think about GBS just maybe becoming a reporting center again, we can think about it as a transformation engine like we talked about in the previous session. How can we make sustainability an opportunity to say, if you don't manage your sustainable issues, you're not managing your business. That's fundamentally the bottom line. If you're not managing your waste that's coming out of the business, if you're not trying to reduce your waste, how can we not say that reducing waste actually improves the bottom line? It absolutely does. How can we say that if we are not making our products and services recyclable, that it actually improves your costs and your benefits? It absolutely does. So instead of seeing sustainability as a challenge and as a requirement and as a compliance issue, what we need to see it as is an opportunity. And so it will fundamentally make organizations rethink what is their value proposition. It'll make them rethink how they deliver that value and actually create that long-term business resilience. So my message to the finance people is, it's not a reporting issue, it's actually a business management issue. And we need to start managing the aspects of sustainability and make it a part of our business. In terms of technology adoption and the change that finance is seeing, we did a survey in 2018. We followed it up in 23. You can see the green numbers are in 23, the orange in 18. So 5 years on, RPA has grown significantly, almost doubled. Advanced analytics continues to grow. Visualization is almost at the 50%. And cloud adoption and cloud is in the late majority now. Climate tech is bubbling up because of ESG reporting requirements. And you can see blockchain in terms of the usage of blockchain. And it under-delivered for sure. And that was something we thought. Climate tech is measuring carbon. What kind of companies are? Right. There's software companies who enable you to measure your carbon footprint by producing various models. So if you think about, your requirement is you have to report the carbon footprint of your employees. Are they taking trains? Are they cycling? Are they using their own cars? Are they walking? And you have to estimate the carbon usage of your employees. There's models that have been built by climate tech companies where they give you the model, you input all this information, and it spits out your carbon estimates. So that is scope 3, right? Scope 3 reporting, for example. I didn't want to get too technical. So the carbon footprint has 3 parts to its reporting. Scope 1 is usually the energy company. So if you're in power production, that's scope 1. So most of you are not generating unless you're Shell or BP. Scope 2 is your usage. So what are you using in the business in terms of your fuel, in terms of electricity, in terms of water? Scope 3 is the most difficult part of the equation, where you have to report what is your supply chain and your supplier's use of carbon that has gone into your product. And that is what Europeans require. So the IFRS, which is the International Financial Reporting Standards, don't require scope 3. They've stopped at scope 1 and 2. But Europeans, ESRS, requires scope 3 emissions. It's the most difficult, but it's the highest footprint in terms of carbon. So your own footprint is much smaller than the footprint of your entire supply chain. And so again, there's software companies that enable you to capture that information and then eventually be able to report that information. So that's kind of climate tech. Sorry, I didn't want to scare you all. So technology adoption has been growing. So what is that doing? We heard about operating models and we heard about GBSs, et cetera. And so what is happening in, and this is just the finance function, accounting operations are being squeezed at the bottom. So the typical pyramid is becoming more of like a diamond shape, where the automation in RPA, being in the cloud, being able to compute in memory, et cetera, is squeezing the amount of people engaged in accounting operations to about between 10 and 20%. And at the top, you have the management at about 10%. But the middle is where it continues to grow. And that's the opportunity in terms of, as you think about knowledge-intensive services, it's in decision support, it's in analytics, and it's in subject matter expertise. That's tax, treasury, mergers and acquisitions, and that's where, and then you've got the reg tech, which is around technology that is helping you with implementing regulations, tracking regulations, and making sure you're complying with the regulations. It's especially big in pharma, where regulations by country across the globe are really, really complex. So there's technology that's enabling you to comply with the regulations. Financial services is another big one in terms of reg tech. But what technology is enabling us to do, and you see AI as well in analytics and decision support, is helping you to really shorten the time between data to decision. And a lot of the decision making is being driven by technology, but the need for people in that middle band with the ability to use these technologies and engage in decision making and business support is the future. And that's where we'll require 80% of our workforce being focused on. The amount of data that's available in terms of analyzing your customers, analyzing your supply chain, analyzing operational efficiencies and HR, these are all value partnering opportunities that your finance function should be engaged in. And so when you think about your FP&A, when you think about planning and analysis, you have sources of data which we did not have before. I've been with the AICPA CIMA now for 10 years. So my previous job was a CFO for global logistics operations. And I wish I had the technologies that we have available today 10 years ago. It is powerful, and it really enables us to ingest data. If you're able to get your data to be standardized, your data to be governed well, et cetera. We heard a lot about data and data cleansing and having the right amount of data in our opening, the right quality of data when Rakesh opened. But if you have the data disciplines, you're able to engage in value partnering, and your amount of accounting data and finance data becomes irrelevant if you are engaged in value creating in terms of customers, the resources and relationships, and in operations. I'll touch on the finance role in terms of AI and Gen AI. We're not trying to make finance to be able to start to write prompts in prompt engineering. We're not wanting them to become large language model data scientists or data engineers. What finance needs to be able to do, I'll start from the bottom, is they need to be able to champion generative AI. They need to be able to champion AI. Because to be able to support the business case, and AI and Gen AI is such a recent development. And it is so hard to make decisions around how much to invest in it, and how to invest in it, and what to invest in, and which areas to invest in. It's really critical for finance to be able to be at the table alongside the CIO, the CTO, the CDO, and the CEO to be able to make the right decisions as to where to implement AI, how to implement AI, and how to de-risk your AI investments. And the implications on the roles and on the functional lines between sales, marketing, finance, accounting, operations, supply chain, these lines have become very blurred because of technology. Who owns the data? Who owns data governance? Who owns the analytics? And it's all becoming multifunctional. And so to understand how roles and responsibilities are changing in the organization, how what each function does changes, needs to be carefully thought through. You need to be able to look at your new org design. You need to be, that training and development thing comes in again. You need to be able to understand what is machine learning. Machine learning traditionally has done 4 things, and it's all based on statistics. It's regression analysis for predicting the future. It's clustering based on data sets. It's classification based on the parameters you give it. It can classify A or B. It can cluster between A, B, C, D, and identify groups of customers or groups of variables that have similar characteristics. And the final thing statistics and machine learning can do is identify the outlier. That's where fraud detection comes in. That's how you get a text from your credit card company saying, did you just spend that because it's outside the parameters of where you've normally gone and the amounts that you've spent. And that's the immediate kind of outlier analysis. So really understand how AI is working within your company and how you can leverage the statistics and also understand bias in statistics and in your data. Incorporating it into all your finance processes, how can you actually use Gen AI in your finance processes is really important to understand. And then obviously, how can AI actually change your front-end customer experience? How can it change your products? How can it change the way you deliver your products is really important, because the top-line driver of Gen AI is where most spend is happening today. More than 50% of the spend, Gartner, according to a Gartner survey, more than 50% of the organizations that were investing in Gen AI are investing it at the front end to serve the customer or to serve the customer in a different way. So all of that is important, and for finance to understand what is it that is our role. So I'll close with this. The linear line that you saw from the left to right is now a continuous loop. And that is the major transformation that's happened because of data, because of ability to ingest data, ability to process the data, ability to take the information and produce insights, be able to advise, be able to influence the outcomes. So on the left-hand side, we need to be really able to drive automation and improve effectiveness and efficiencies. But on the right-hand side, what you need is, it comes back to human skills. It's investing in those leadership skills, investing in the people management skills, being able to manage your human capital, being able to manage relationship capital, your social capital. That's where you really influence and create impact. So we cannot underestimate the need for human skills. And we cannot underestimate the need to invest in those human skills. And that's really what my focus is on. My role with the AICPA CIMA is, as Andrew mentioned, it's around the Chartered Institute of Management Accounting, the actual Chartered Management Accountant qualification. And we have reduced the amount of syllabus that we teach in terms of the accounting qualification. Only 20% of it is focused on accounting. The other 80% is focused on strategy, execution, people, management, change management, project management. Because that's what it is all about. It's about being able to drive change, it's about being able to manage change, and it's about being able to deliver change. And so when you think about the type of investments you're making in your people, you have to think about, yes, we need to train them and upskill them on the left-hand side, but you also, at the same time, need to elevate them to a level where your GBSs, your operations, are able to be confident about managing stakeholders, making those 4 shifts: stakeholder management, business model management, time horizon management, and capitals management. That's really it. If you can finally, this is just an open input from your phones. If you can think about the type of challenges that you're saying, those of you who said no, you're not ready for them, or even those of you who said yes, you're ready for those changes, it would be really, for me, valuable, and for the others, really valuable to think about what is it that we need to be addressing as challenges so that we can make these 4 shifts. The shifts in business model management, the shift in relationship management, the shifts in the time horizon management, and the capitals management. It's an open input field, and you can input more than one time. It'll just allow you to come back and continue to make additional points if you'd like to. And if you could have that up on the screen, we'll close straight after that. No money for ESG. That's why regulation is going to help you with that, because you have to start reporting. Andrew, I know you wanted to finish a little bit early, so I'll cut now and say thank you very much. I appreciate... oh, questions?
Yeah, we have to have questions. I mean, I have one.
Sure.
But we all know CIMA, yeah? But this man here has been talking to me about CIMA for how many, 12 years? 15 years? 12 years. 12 years. When he started, in Poland, there were like 10 people with CIMA. Wasn't that right? Wasn't that right? Maybe 20, 20, right? Okay. Today, how many people in Poland doing CIMA? How many people in Poland doing CIMA today? That's impressive.
2,500, yeah.
What's happened? Why are people embracing CIMA?
Okay, because CIMA, like I said, CIMA is not an accounting qualification, right? CIMA is all about delivering the ability to make that change. And the way we've structured the program is in bite-sized chunks, and we've cut it down into competencies. So you focus on a competency, you learn the competency, you pass the competency, and then your employer can actually deploy that competency. One of the reasons why training and development fails is we give a massive library of content to the employees and say, well, you can learn whatever you want to. We don't know what they've learned. And then if you don't actually deploy what you've learned, it's soon forgotten. So if you don't use it, you lose it. We all know that. So one of the things that you can address is you identify a competency, you deliver that, and then you deploy that. And then it stays with that person. And finding ways of having learning that actually is structured is targeting a specific competency, and then it's actually deploying that competency at the workplace. That's what really creates the competency. So only 10% of the competency development comes through that formal learning, but it's the deployment which is the other 90% to build the competency. So we've created programs that actually allow employers to track the competencies and then to deploy them.
Where's the discount code? Where's the discount code? Can we want a discount code? Just
Piotr is the
2%, 2%, go on, 2%.
No, you can see Piotr, and we can come over and get your corporate discounts.
Any questions from anybody? You should all be scared, honestly scared about this supply chain reporting. You should be petrified. Really, guys. This is going to hurt everybody so much. And it's imminent, isn't it? It's imminent.
January 24, sorry, I'm 10 years behind. January 24, it started.
And what happens if you don't report it?
There will be, so if you're listed, there will be...
Delisting.
There will be, there will be...
Yellow cards.
IOSCO, which is the integrator and the regulator for stock exchanges, will start delisting if you're listed. So this is serious stuff. This is where preservation of value is important, and you're not creating value, but you're preserving value by reporting. But you can, as I said, create value by making sustainability a part of your business model. So
It's not going to be enough just banning your staff from traveling on aeroplanes. You have to do more.
right.
But see these chaps about it if you want to know more. Thank you, everybody, for
Thank you
attending.
very much. Appreciate it.